Resident Evil has long reigned supreme in the realm of survival horror and zombie action, establishing its dominance in the genre since its initial release in 1996. The duration required to complete a full playthrough of a Resident Evil game often varies, whether that involves a simple linear campaign or multiple character scenarios. So here's a handy little cheat sheet of every Resident Evil game ranked from shortest to longest. Starting out, the Resident Evil 3 remake is one of the shortest games in the series, and has proved to be pretty disappointing among fans, with quite a bit of cut content, coming in at only 6 hours to beat. Also at about 6 hours, the 1998 Resident Evil 2 is set 2 months after the original game, and follows Leon and Claire as they explore the abandoned Raccoon City. The game received plenty of praise from critics for its gameplay, story, and environments, and even got its very own remake in 2019. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis came with an additional hour's worth of content, and introduced the iconic RE villain Nemesis to the franchise, as well as popularizing the use of stalker-like enemies to the series. Next is the original Resident Evil from 1996, the one that started it all and clocks in at about 7 hours. For modern gamers, the runtime may seem a little underwhelming, but at the time of release, the game was considered to be packed with content. Just slightly longer than that was Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles, an on-rails shooter taking a different approach to its gameplay. As one might expect, this offered no room for exploration, and the game isn't terribly long, even when compacting 3 of the mainline games inside of one package. Resident Evil Outbreak serves as a spin-off to the main overarching storyline, and is less like the other main titles and more of an arcade shooter, with players choosing the difficulty and character before diving into each episode, and special objectives that will rake up more points. Resident Evil: The Dark Side Chronicles is another rail shooter, challenging the player to use Wii motion controls to aim with precision and gun down the enemies on screen. Despite being an arcade-style shooter, this game actually features a surprisingly lengthy campaign of around 8 hours. Resident Evil Revelations is focused on Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine on their mission to find answers about a bioterrorist organization that plans to infect all of the Earth's oceans with a dangerous virus. At 8 hours, it's one of the shorter games on the list, but it provides some great storytelling and attempts to return the series to its more survival horror roots. Resident Evil 2 stands as one of the most iconic video games ever made, and the remake in 2019 certainly managed to do it justice. The graphical improvements look incredible, and the improved voice acting provides gamers with a much more believable experience. As the sequel to the original Outbreak files, the second file had online capability at the time of its release, allowing players to run through scenarios with 3 friends. As such, one might expect players would rush through this game, and yet it still has an average completion time of about 10 hours. Resident Evil 7 marked a significant shift in the series, almost serving as a reboot. The game was the franchise's first attempt at first-person horror, and puts players through 10 horrifying hours of gameplay that will certainly keep them on the edge of their seats. And the following game in the series, Resident Evil Village, had a similar runtime, and follows the same protagonist, Ethan, through various themed areas in a European village. The next longest is Revelations 2, featuring the return of Claire Redfield, as well as Barry Burton's daughter, Moira Burton. The game packs a decent amount of content, resulting in 10 hours of playtime. The remake of the 1996 classic featured some important changes that significantly improved the original game, including some new enemy types to mix up the gameplay, and the mansion itself being expanded, which helped to significantly increase the playtime of the original game. Resident Evil Code Veronica takes place 3 months after the events of Resident Evil 2, and is a bit of a fan favorite. And following the recent remakes of RE2, 3, and 4, fans are incredibly eager for Code Veronica to potentially receive the same treatment. It already packs in 12 hours of content, but a remake could potentially fit in even more. Resident Evil 0 takes place directly before the events of the original game, and explores some of the events and characters of the first game more in depth, building up to a 12-hour runtime. Resident Evil 5 follows the series regular Chris Redfield and newcomer Shiva Olimar on a mission to investigate a terrorist threat. The game heavily encourages co-op gameplay, and while it's received some criticism for moving away from the series' horror roots, it still stands as a fun co-op experience at about 12 hours in length. Resident Evil 4 sees the return of Leon on a rescue mission to save the US president's daughter. The game features deadly infected enemies and various themed areas and chapters to complete, resulting in a game clocking in at an impressive 16 hours of runtime. And so it would make sense that the RE4 remake in 2023 has also proved to have one of the longest runtimes in the series, also clocking in at 16 hours. And lastly, the longest game in the franchise is Resident Evil 6, at 21 hours for an average completion. This is thanks to the game's 4 scenarios that feature the interwoven storylines of Leon, Ada, Jake, and Chris. Unfortunately, the game received quite a lot of disapproval from critics on abandoning its roots in survival horror for much more action-oriented gameplay. And that's it for our list. Thank you so much for watching, and go to GameRant.com for more like this.